Décollage.
Decollage, liftoff from a tropical rainforest to the edge of time itself. James Webb begins a voyage back to the birth of the universe.
NASA's James Webb Space Telescope was launched by rocket from South America's northeastern coast early Saturday, opening a new era of astronomy. The $9 billion infrared telescope, which has been hailed by NASA as the premier space science observatory of the next decade, was carried aloft inside the cargo bay of an Ariane 5 rocket that blasted off from the European Space Agency's launch base in French Guiana. After a 27-minute ride into space, the 14,000-pound instrument was released and should gradually unfurl to nearly the size of a tennis court over the next 13 days as it sails onward on its own. Coasting through space for 2 more weeks, the Webb Telescope will reach its destination in solar orbit 1 million miles from Earth, about 4 times farther away than the Moon, and Webb's special orbital path will keep it in constant alignment with the Earth as the planet and telescope circle the Sun in tandem. By comparison, Webb's 30-year-old predecessor, the Hubble Space Telescope, orbits the Earth from 340 miles away, passing in and out of the planet's shadow every 90 minutes. Named after the man who oversaw NASA through most of its formative decade of the 1960s, Webb is about 100 times more sensitive than Hubble and is expected to transform scientists' understanding of the universe and our place in it. Astronomical operation of the telescope is expected to begin in the summer of 2022.
We have uncovered wonders undreamt by our ancestors who first speculated on the nature of those wandering lights in the night sky. We've crossed the solar system and sent ships to the stars. But we continue to search. We can't help it. A central element of the human future lies far beyond the Earth. If we crave some cosmic purpose, then let us find ourselves a worthy goal.
Can you give us a little refresher on the Big Bang?
Sure, the Big Bang, a short refresher, let's see.
Just the beginning of everything.
Yeah, beginning of everything, no big deal.
Put these little glue dots on the back of these.
Oh no.
So now we're gonna build the mirror.
Golden hexagons, silver sunshield.
Keep putting it on backwards.
I'm Amber Strawn, an astrophysicist at NASA, and today we're going to be building a model of the James Webb Space Telescope, the largest, most complex, most powerful telescope NASA has ever sent to space.
This telescope has been in development since 1996. Bill Clinton was president. I looked it up. The top song on the radio was the Macarena. That wasn't too far after the Hubble went up into orbit.
Right.
So what was inspiring the folks at NASA at the time to start planning for another one so soon?
We've been able to see very distant galaxies with Hubble, but if you look in these deep fields, you see where you come up to the edge, where there are no more galaxies, but we know there are more galaxies. We knew that in order to find extremely distant galaxies, we would need an infrared telescope. And JWST was specifically designed to be able to see that first epoch of galaxies that were born after the Big Bang.
How does that work?
Yeah, so we're basically able to do that because light takes time to travel across the universe. So you can sort of think of You know, the light from the sun takes about 8 minutes to get to the Earth, so we're seeing the sun as it was 8 minutes ago. Like if the sun went out right now, wouldn't know for 8 minutes. And then galaxies that are further away, the light from them takes longer to get here, so we're seeing them as they were further in the past. But they very likely now have, you know, stars and planets and evolved, possibly, you know, evolved life forms, which is super exciting.
Maybe even life forms that build telescopes?
Who knows? Right. They could be looking back at us, but of course they would be seeing us as we were.
What would they see if they were doing exactly the same thing that we're doing?
They would basically see the same thing that we're going to see when we look at them.
Which is like primitive galaxies.
Exactly. So basically, not long after the Big Bang, the only thing in the universe was hydrogen and helium. But there were some parts of the universe that were more dense than other parts, and that collapse of that hydrogen and helium were the first stars and the first galaxies. And so by looking at the different galaxies at different distances, we're sort of able to put together a picture of how galaxies change over time.
Okay, so I'm gonna pop this on, slide this on this one.
So this is where all the electronics will be. And then here we have our solar array, which is where we get power. And this is a communications antenna, so we can talk to the spacecraft once it's in space.
What are these?
The telescope, the mirror, and the instruments have to be shielded from the light and the heat of the sun. You know, you think of a normal telescope, like Hubble or your backyard telescope, and those telescopes have tubes, right? That's what shields those mirrors. This telescope, since it's so big, and also since it's going to be very far away in space, we don't really need a tube. We only need a shield, and the mirrors and instruments will be able to stay very, very cold. That is important because this is an infrared telescope, and we have to use infrared light to see those first stars and galaxies. But everything above absolute zero glows in infrared. So you and I glow in infrared, the planet, the sun, you know, everything is infrared.
It's like thermal camera, night vision.
Exactly, yeah. You can sort of think of night vision goggles. If it was warm, it would sort of glow and sort of see itself. So that's why we're putting it out in deep space, and that's why we need these amazing sun shields.
So where exactly in space will this telescope live?
So we are sending this telescope about 4 times further away than the moon, to give you a sense of scale.
Okay. So Hubble is like really, really close compared to that.
Yes.
And Hubble's going around us, so it's getting closer to the sun, farther away from the sun.
Right.
This thing is going to stay on our night side,
Yes.
on the Mars side of Earth, and just kind of head around the sun with us, but
Yes.
always on the outside.
Exactly, yeah. It will sort of, you can think of it, it'll always be sort of in the midnight sky, sort of straight above.
So the sun shields are keeping the heat away from the mirror and the instruments. How hot would it get if they weren't there?
So the sun is always, you know, shining on this bottom side of the telescope, and this is about 200 degrees Fahrenheit, and the cold side will end up being about 400 degrees below 0 Fahrenheit. So it ends up being about a 600 degree difference between the hot side and the cold side.
Just because of these 5 little super thin...
Yeah.
How does that work?
So the reason that there are these 5 layers is because in between each layer, the heat basically is radiated outward, okay? And so by the time you get to each successive layer, it's a little bit cooler. And so that's the reason one sun shield wouldn't work.
Okay.
This design gives us a more efficient way to get it very, very cold on the top.
Okay, so now we're going to build the mirror.
Hooray!
So if you want to put glue dots on the back and then hand me the piece.
Sure.
So just to get back to the basics, why do telescopes have mirrors?
So mirrors are essentially like buckets. So the size of a mirror is really important because if you think about sitting a bucket outside when it's raining, the bigger your bucket, the more water you're going to collect. This mirror is about 21.5 feet across. It's about 6 times the light collecting area of Hubble. And in comparison to Hubble, of course, Hubble is our gold standard of telescopes, and we love Hubble.
We do.
But when we take into account the size of the mirror, the wavelength range that this telescope will see in the infrared light, and the sort of efficiency of the detectors, we expect this telescope to be about 100 times more powerful than Hubble.
That's crazy.
It's going to be awesome.
And so why gold and why hexagons?
So gold, it turns out, is a great reflector of infrared light. The reason it's in hexagons is we can't launch it fully deployed as a full mirror. So we have to fold it, and hexagons pack together very nicely and are very foldable. So basically, these 3 mirrors and then these 3 mirrors will fold backwards. And then once it gets to space, it has to do the opposite. It has to unfold. And then we have a telescope.
And how long does that process take?
That whole process takes about 2 weeks from start to finish. So it's going to be a tense 2 weeks after launch. And if something doesn't happen exactly as it's supposed to or exactly as we've planned, we can pause, figure out what's going on, and then work to fix it.
But fixing it does not include sending an astronaut there to fix it.
Definitely not. So it's going to be too far away to send astronauts to. You know, there is some risk involved in building a telescope like this. We can't go fix it. And that's one of the reasons it's taken so long to test it, to make sure it's going to work like it's supposed to.
Light travels across the universe, hits here, then there's a secondary mirror, and it bounces off of that,
Yes.
and then it goes into here, and then what happens?
And then it collects on the instruments.
So that's
behind.
this.
That's there. This is an international collaboration. And yeah, Europe is providing a couple of our instruments and Canada's providing an instrument.
So the telescope has fuel, and I read that the fuel can only last maybe up to 10 years. So 25 years of development, 10 years of operation. Can you explain why this is worth it?
So if you consider the cost of this telescope over development and operations, it actually comes out to be less than the price of a cheap cup of coffee per year per U.S. citizen.
Okay.
So,
Wait,
see,
1 cup of coffee per person per year.
yeah,
That's easy.
in a cheap cup, like less than $1.
Okay, like a bodega coffee.
Yeah, exactly. I also think it's sort of like it's in the DNA of our country that we spend money on things that make the world more good. Things like public parks and public libraries, you know, those things that we sort of all enjoy and that make the world a better place. And I really think astronomy falls into that category. You know, we have this 13.8 billion year story of the universe, and it's like we're missing key paragraphs from that very first chapter. We don't know how it got started. And so that's one of the key things that we're going to be able to do with this telescope.
And it's so cool to think that the light that this is collecting will have left the source, has been traveling for billions of years.
Yeah.
Our solar system forms in the meantime.
Yeah.
An intelligent species evolves and creates this machine,
Yes.
throws it into space, and there is the light to meet it so that we can figure out where we came from.
We have all these specific plans, these specific things we want to learn, but I think that the most awesome thing we'll end up learning with this telescope we haven't even thought of yet. Because when we increase our technology by an extreme amount like this, I think it's inevitable that we'll find something that completely surprises us and causes us to rethink how we understand the universe.